Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the BuzzStream Podcast. I'm your host, Vince Nero. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Rick Maughan. He is the head of content at Talker Research. This is really kind of cool for me because I discovered Talker Research just doing some research of my own on survey, ideation. I was writing a post about it, doing some analyses of just kind of great surveys out there, and I came across a post that Talker Research had done, a survey of their own, and something just kind of clicked with me there, and I was like, man, I think it would be great to actually interview people who do this stuff day in, day out. That's their sole focus. I think I could bring in a lot of great insights and maybe some tips that people don't know about. So thrilled to talk about that today. Before I do, I just want to remind people, like, subscribe, share this stuff with your colleagues. The more that you do, the more we can have great guests like Rick on. How you doing, Rick?
Hi, Vince. I'm great. Thank you. Lovely to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, Rick, let's get started. I just want to give you a quick chance to talk a little bit about Talker Research and just tell people what it is before we get too far into it.
Yeah, great. And thank you for that very kind introduction. Yeah, Talker Research is as it sounds. It's a research agency at its core. So everything we do is foundational with data, mostly online and survey based. That's our kind of bread and butter. And we, at our heart, deliver survey-led news, everything from idea all the way through to hopefully coverage and getting the story talked about. And that's really why we chose the name Talker. We want to produce content that drives conversations, that's engaging, and that kind of really gets thought leadership out there. So that kind of defines us at the heart of everything we do, whether it's insightful or engaging data sets, or really revealing information that help organizations progress their internal motives. So we work across a number of things, primarily consumer facing and consumer led. So we probably sit most comfortably in the lifestyle and consumer space. So you alluded to the things like movie surveys and things like that, but we also have a lot more under the hood. We do work across a range of clients and industries.
Yeah, and I want to clarify one thing. Did you say that you also do the securing coverage as well?
We do. So yeah, this is where Talker Research differentiates a little bit. We have a kind of sister agency. We are Talker that we work hand in hand with. And we ensure that if we're involved in a project, we help to get the survey out there as well. Now, it's mostly in terms of over time building a really good reputation with the media for our talkers, for kind of a hub of great usable content that people like yourself come across and want to be alerted about. So that beholds us to a certain standard in terms of the integrity of our research and the quality of stories. We'll only put things in the Talker newsroom that we feel represent us and the research well. But yeah, that's kind of where we sit. So we do a little bit more. We're much more ideas oriented and invested in the outcomes of the research, than maybe a traditional researcher that would provide you the data and then you would go on.
Just hands up. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I do think, as a former person that worked in an agency, having that through line, I think is super important. Being able to think of the end user who's going to actually read this stuff, who's going to interact with it. And I'm sure you kind of have a better sense of the audience that if there is an audience that exists for this type of thing. And we'll get into a little bit of that, but I want to start kind of at the very beginning. In the ideation phase, because this is where most people, trip up or spend a lot of time. How do you come up with an idea for a survey?
Yeah, good question, isn't it? Where do you get your ideas? And I think it's a combination. We still like good old fashioned people in a room throwing ideas around. And again, I will try not to burden us with tons of Talker related synonyms, but it's conversation. I will put, you can count me, do a little measure. But it's about what sparks that talk, what feels real. When we are brainstorming, whether it's a client brief or whether we're bringing our own input and insight, does it generate talk? Does it people want to chip in, share their anecdotes. We know we've got something when we've forgotten there's a brief and we've been talking for 10 minutes and everyone's been inputting, because that shows it's interactive. People want to contribute to that topic. They have things to share. They have opinions. And then we know we're onto something interesting that's worthy of insight, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, sorry, go ahead.
No, and in there is a calculated and careful mix. So we've got a good team that are dedicated to doing this day in, day out. It really is our core focus. So we live and breathe it. Researchers, of course, news and editors and journalists and comms people. We've got a really nice mix of perspectives and people that come in with different takes, and that kind of really helps. Of course, we're constantly tapped into the agenda. We ingest news in our every pore, and we're also, of course, monitoring data-led coverage wherever it may come from, whether it's one of ours or someone else. So we're really living and breathing the space, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that stands out to me is there is no one right way to do it, right? Like it seems like it comes from everywhere, and it's more about kind of tuning your, make sure you're on the right wavelength to like take in the stuff that you can like bring to these meetings. But it does sound like the meeting and like collaboration is a big part of it. Would you say that's?
I think so, because you just for a sense of, perspective and to not feel you're shouting into the void. I mean, obviously we have AI and things like that. Anyone can throw in and have singular idea sessions, but there's something about resonating with that human creativity, that like seeing people's eyes either light up or die inside when you've thrown out a terrible idea, but also having that, I love how AI will be like, great idea, no matter what you say. No, we want human
sycophant. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's so important to create that space where you can go, tell you what happened to me, and I wonder if this is an idea. And just by public feedback, no, that one, no, that's not. The silence in the room, and creating that space to creatively be okay with that is really important. You have to kind of share a bit of vulnerability. Or I liken the best ideas to like stand-up comics, and it's that level of human and behavioral observation. My old news editors of the past, I'm old enough that we were given physical DVDs sometimes just to spontaneously generate ideas. And we would go and watch the set, see what ideas generate into data-led stories. And, obviously we, as a team, sometimes we do things like that. We might take a 1 hour special each and kind of come back and see if that it's things like that. Cause those people are masters of daily observation. That's really what good research is,
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think there's always different ways to, kind of prompt the brainstorm, prime the pump for like to get your brain going that way. So it sounds like you also are paying attention to news. What's kind of the percentage of like news driven, kind of timely driven ideation that happens versus just like, whatever you came across today kind of in your daily life?
Yeah, it's a good mix. I think we do the news-driven agenda reactive stuff, mostly for other publishers. So that's another window that we have is we work to provide them with data for their editorial purposes. So we see what they're kind of looking at, what's resonating for their audiences. So the news stuff does drive us. We will put out polls purely for Talker research, in terms of, look, this is just a topic that demands a survey, like now let's do it. But we also think a little bit more evergreen. I was really interested in your excellent YouGov analysis and the time versus evergreen study. Really good stuff. And that's somewhere where we sit. I think you want everything to be timely. Of course, it helps from a news perspective, but in the realistic marketing or market research world, you need timelines and project. If there's many kind of hands on the project, you have to be a bit more realistic in terms of the speed of these things. So in that case, we're really looking for the sweet spot of kind of evergreen, but with that timeliness within a kind of month period,
Yes.
Cost of living isn't going away anytime soon. If it's a story that's dead in a week, you really have to make it that then we probably aren't always as suited to it. Yeah, it's hard to give a percentage. We're more towards the like long form research than reactive in the day news agenda type.
Yeah, and I think too, like to your point, like when I think of timely, I think it's the bucket there can be there are recurring events, to your point, like holidays, seasons, like things that you can plan for. It's like the proactive approach that you can then leverage as an angle. And I think you mentioned the YouGov analysis I did. I think there was a lot of that where it was like, we're going to do this survey because we know this is a thing that happens every year. It's the Thanksgiving. What's your favorite Thanksgiving food, whatever time?
Yeah.
I think it was. So it does get a little more tricky, to your point too, when you're thinking of brands, right? So like if you're an agency and you have, like a tough brand, like there are definitely ones that lend themselves more to this. But I think two things always come up. It's this stuff has already been done, right? You come up with a great idea and you're like, someone's done it already. You're like that happens 9 times out of 10. But then the other thing is just like, how can I make this thing interesting? How can I make this, if someone comes to Talker Research and it's like, I'm a, construction client, or I'm a, whatever, like, how do you make those kind of quote unquote boring industries less boring with a survey?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And obviously it varies depending on the client and the industry. But yeah, take construction or something like that. We do specialize in B2C, but we get B2B clients a lot. We do a lot with them. One client that springs to mind is they're used by contractors within the building industry, and they're a specific financial invoicing tool used by those specific type of contractors. So
I think I might have worked for one of or we had a client just like that.
Okay, so if you take someone like that, so for us, we've done a lot of great work with them in terms of just broadening to like, how do you make it a people story, not a product story? So if we were, we will find a panel of actual contractors and we will get their takes and insights. We will get, useful data that resonates with the key target audience there and drives trade and specialist cover. But we'll try and relate what they're saying to a wider, potentially forecasting type story. So, they were seeing certain things that indicated potential recession indicators. So for example, that was a story that applied more to the average person. So we would take something like their forecasting, their positioning in an industry that can be predictive for economic things, and we would apply it then to a kind of average news reading audience. At the same time, we would also poll general respondents, and we would look at things like topics like ask them about affordable housing in their area, and we just done a story of that's made incredibly well across a suite of publications, because that's the way we can make that relatable. We get the tool on the radar, they get consumer coverage, they get industry specific coverage, and they see value on both fronts. So it's a bit of both, a bit of give and take. If there's no interest in the consumer side of things, we might play more as direct researcher and less creative advisor,
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I love the kind of thought process of it's a give and take, right? Like in this realm of like the digital PR specifically, there's such this intersection of there's like SEO goals, traffic goals, but then there are, rankings goals and whatever showing up in AI goals. But then there's like just the kind of brand awareness. And obviously a lot of those things cross over one another. But I think there is a lot of pushback from the SEO people where it's like, oh, you're getting coverage for things that aren't directly related to your brand. But a lot of times you do have to step out, like for instance, like affordable housing might not be right in the wheelhouse, but you're going to get a lot of coverage for it. And that raises that brand awareness, gets your name out there. And that might be even more relevant these days for AI and just, the brand mentions, unlike brand mentions. But I do think there's always going to be that give and take. But then I also love the secondary kind of takeaway there where it was like, hey, if it's really not working, like there are ways to use data outside of just survey. You can build a white paper, you like to use lead generation things, these like industry reports. I think that's another thing. So I really love that. I want to get into a little bit of like the social proof aspect of these ideas, because I alluded to this earlier of like, how do you know these ideas are going to work? Obviously you have the experience, right? You've been doing this for so long. You have a team that's been doing this, and there is a little bit of that, like, is this idea starting a conversation, right? Are we all talking about it? But do you do anything to see, uh, has this idea been done before? Like, how could we pitch this? Are you talking to the We Are Talker team and be like, does this have legs from a pitching perspective? Tell me a little bit about that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So on any campaign we do, we always have media relations input. We've got an excellent media relations team who again, day to day, it's data stories and dealing with the media, and they pick up so much feedback and they have great relationships. And, we're in that privileged position where we do speak directly to publishers on a kind of almost weekly basis in some form or another. So we get that kind of feedback and in terms of editors and what they're looking for. And that obviously changes, not just, it changes newsroom to newsroom. We'll have some that are like, oh, they're obsessing over a quantitative data. Others that are actually like, we really want qualitative. We would,
Right.
can we
Interesting.
access the respondents? Can we get,
Yeah.
everyone's playing a bit of a guessing game. Okay. Oh, we need to build up authority index on articles. We need first person account. We need original quotes. We need this. Can we, so we're seeing, and it goes through phases where we're like, oh God, okay, we need, and then that ripples down to our client led stories where we're like, okay, can we make sure we can access respondents and do qualitative takeaways where we can, and ensure that we can, when we get a journalist, nothing worse than a journalist coming to you going, love this. Can I speak to someone who did the survey? And you're like,
Right.
no, we didn't have the right content permissions on that one because we didn't think of it at the start. So things like that give us some format. And then, yes, you're always looking to see, has it been done before? In what way? And how can you bring a fresh take to it? Context is everything. Being able to make sure that it has that timeliness for this year. Why is it a story for now? We live in that space of like, okay, right, another tax season's coming. We know that those same sort of sets that we've all had tax clients, same sort of tax data and questions that they'll want to run, or the same sort of hypotheses. It's about trying to put fresh spins on things wherever we can. So that's really, what we're constantly trying to push. Yeah.
Yeah. That makes it's funny. I'm writing notes as you're talking, and I'm like, so far the three notes I have are human observation, people telling a people story versus a product, and getting quotes from people. I'm starting to see a theme
Yeah.
here that it seems to be very important to get a personal approach. And this actually ties to something I saw, a Muckrack study. They did this like state of journalism. They have a couple different reports, the state of journalism report. And one of them was, how can a PR professional provide the most value for a journalist? And the journalist said, last year it was provide me with research and data, and now the highest is provide me with relevant sources and connect me with relevant sources. And I think there's this kind of change a bit where, especially in this AI era where everybody's struggling to find real people online, and like there's these fake, you're hearing these fake experts and everything. But I think there's this need for like these case studies and really telling a human story and adding a human piece to the data. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that, because when you talk about some of the kind of semantics. So when people are gathering data, is that something that it seems like you really always need to get now, is like some insight from the people who are answering the questions? Is that something you'd recommend anybody doing that to really gather?
I think it's definitely something to be open to. I think a blend, even if it's inside the research doing free text or open answer, questions and allowing respondents to contribute, because that gives you some gold in terms of just the creative, unpredictable, brilliant responses you can get, or the insightful stuff, or the poignant and heartstring pulling data. It's, we are craving, and I think that's where surveys still work so well. We crave a bit of collective experience. We're all funneled down these media kind of individual journeys, right? We get our algorithms serving us everything in the way we like it, and that's only going to increase. You look at things like ChatGPT's Pulse offering. I think it's all going to be in the styles we want it, in the way we want it. There's a lot about where we go with that. But I think it's about, we do crave a bit of like, well, what's that person's experience, and is it human, and where do I relate in terms of that experience? Not in a divisive or oppositional way, but if you do disagree with it, it's also a piece you want to interact with, things like, and that's why data is so good for hanging up averages. You mentioned the movie one, the perfect length is 92 minutes. I might not agree with that. I might think that's weird. Why is it 92, not 97, not 120? But it makes me want to know that experience and kind of understand what people are thinking. So I think whether it is in the quantitative side of a nice collective average, which I can engage with, or it's providing that kind of ability for journalists to get exclusive quotes or to interact with the data further. I think it's a mix is the kind of short answer.
Yeah. I mean, right. There's a lot of times there's no great hard answer, like we said, like a hard truth with this stuff. I think it's going to depend. Can you talk to me a little bit about sample size? I think this is something that a lot of people run into sometimes. It seems to me, in my experience at least, it kind of has gone both ways. Like sometimes journalists will really hone in on, let me know, like explain the methodology. Like I want to see the data. I want to get into it, versus others don't seem to care. They just care about the story. Talk to me about how important that kind of stuff is, the methodology, the sample size, and kind of what goes into it from a journalist point of view, like how it's going to get covered.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you're exactly right. It does vary newsroom to newsroom, but I think wherever possible, credibility is still the biggest driver, right? You want to know that's been responsibly handled. Journalists are perhaps more suspicious than ever. They're being bombarded by pitches. They're being bombarded by data. That no journalist that I've ever met has ever said, I'm short of stories. They're not. They're short of time, resources, and the ability to build those stories, but they're not short of content. People use the analogy teacup over a fire hydrant. Like there's content everywhere, but they need help on what's quality and what's worth covering. So anything that builds that authority, methodologies that cite, of course, I'm, declare bias here, but proper researchers, people that subscribe to transparency initiatives, organizations that, it's been properly handled and are completely transparent and open about it, I think is really crucial. So first and foremost, being upfront about your sample in the news copy as well, in your press release, not kind of burying it or hoping that the story kind of does all of the work. I think that transparency is key. I will say story is still king. Story is what matters. There's no magic trick to getting a journalist's attention. It has to be a good story. So that kind of matters most. But when it comes to samples in terms of sizes, I think, it really depends on what's being said and who's saying it. If it's a more general population, our sweet spot would be about 2,000, as a standard. The reason it's that number is it gives you enough at kind of regional level and other breakdowns. It kind of projects better if you are looking at making larger claims that might be representative of a wider population. That 1,000, for example, really stretched thin. In any individual reporting sector, for statistical significance, we need, at the bare minimum, 80 respondents to have any kind of confidence in, responsible reporting. So that's something that we adhere to. But it really depends who's doing the talking, because if it's, for example, a study of 100 ICU nurses, that's relevant and that they're worth listening to, and you don't need thousands, right? If it's,
but you're maybe not breaking it up into male versus female and like that kind of.
No, exactly. You have to be wary that your data won't split. The smaller your kind of sample is, the more niche you get, and it's surprising actually how how quickly you can get niche. You might start with a survey and go like, it's going to be 2,000 people. It's tech use over the holidays. Okay, so they need to celebrate a holiday. Then they need to have a phone, a smartphone, or which is, again, you assume is a collective experience. But, then you're routing. And suddenly your key headline or takeaway, you're like, oh, hold on, it's not of the full 2,000. It's actually only 400 that made it this far. So you have to think early on before the research. And this is why, consultative input and really thinking about things before they go live, because once that button's hit, you really have to make it work with your data set. But thinking about panel is really important and does take a bit of knowledge there. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's really integral, I think. And the 2000, I think, is something I've heard kind of universally in terms of general audience. But then, yeah, to your point, like, it can't. I want to kind of run some of these like ideas that I have or preconceptions that I've been working off of, and I want to kind of get your thoughts on it. So, like, one of the things that we've talked about in the past is if you're wary about like a very specific sample size, right? I think one of the things we say is look at what else is getting coverage. So, like, if you are going to do ICU nurses and you're like, how many should I interview? Look at the other similar studies out there. Does that kind of sound like a good tip?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's, as good as you can do is just looking at the existing. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And then the other big thing here is this idea of like working backwards from a headline, right? Like, and we didn't get too far into this in the ideation, but I think it kind of it crosses over to the sample size and all the takeaways and everything and the story behind it. But I mean, is that kind of how you think about this stuff? Is, you say you come in together, you have a big brainstorm and you decide this is a good idea. We want to survey people about, their favorite protein bars or something. And is it then like, all right, what angles can we take from this? I kind of want to just understand like the construction of a survey from an idea, even getting into like the number of questions that you need to ask to get those angles that you want. So talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, there's definitely some consideration of that because, at the end of the day, we have to make sure it's a story and a data set that works, I think the first kind of flag or thing that helps guide us is, does it feel real? Is it in terms of a hypothesis? Is it something that we believe will emerge in some degree of truth? It doesn't have to be overwhelmingly. And I think this is where sometimes a lot can be a bit misguided is the need to prove your product or your concept in the data, and people fall into the trap of, well, we need a data set to
tell
say
the story. Yeah.
protein bar is the best protein bar. So what we'll do is we'll either poll a list of the best protein bars and pray that ours comes top, and then invariably it doesn't, and then you don't want to mention a load of competitors, and then you've gone down an alley that's like really hard to come back from. And even to start with, protein bar says protein bars are great. I mean, it's not a story, right? So what we would do potentially in that instant, we would say, look, put it in someone's hands. Who's using that? Okay, so gym goers, people that are kind of health conscious. How can we build that into a slightly wider narrative? It might be, we've done stories around. Okay, well, is there anything in like January's coming up? Getting back to the gym in the new year. What can help fuel our kind of health and fitness goals? Perhaps we're a bit anxious about that after a while. Maybe it's phrases like gym intimidation have done very well for us in the past. So something like that, 6 in 10 Americans have gym intimidation. They've freaked out by mirrors, freaked out, worried they'll be in the back of a fitness,
Influencer, yeah.
Video. It's a very
funny.
real fear, and yes, we get a little bit away. And I know that's, you need context. Protein bars want to talk about people eating protein bars, but you have to meet the audience where they are if you're serious about earned coverage. And that's where, yeah.
Well, so that kind of assumes that they haven't already gotten into it, right? So like, do you recommend people, if the goal was, I know this is not necessarily something you would do or is a good idea, but like if the goal is like, I want to ask people what their favorite protein bar is, and I'm hoping ours is going to come out first. Do you like test that hypothesis first and do like here, I'm going to sample 100 people just to see, where things play. And then if it feels like it's telling the story we want, we'll expand it and hope that that's the case.
We don't tend to do much of that. We might if it's a very new sort of hypothesis that we're like, we've really never done anything in that area. Can we, even within the panel, is that feasible? Do we have many of the people that would be eligible, for example? So we do run a lot of feasibility studies, but in terms of trying to forego the opinion or kind of guess the opinion with something like that, I mean, for us, that we do a lot of it, more traditional market research and brand awareness versus competitors. To us, that's that kind of first stage of that journey would be to conduct that research, and we can do that and give that kind of, market share and share of voice analysis, for example. Really, we where we're kind of brought in the creative part of things, we consult on a like, look, can we move it to something that we feel will really help you, get you out there, that isn't so self-serving. We strike that balance.
Right.
We give that data. We would still have a lot of protein bar data in any project we undertook, but we would make sure that we have a way to kind of a less biased hypothesis always has a bigger chance of working, kind of getting them out there. So it's just a different way of working, but there's a lot of ways as well in terms of how to safeguard against the results not coming out. But the biggest hit to that is a really like, it must come out that this specific individual thing reaches, top,
Yeah, no, I mean, I guess I'm speaking from experience in the past of like, there are some instances where it's like, I've run surveys, and when I started, I wasn't like great at this either, like thinking these through, but like, you'd have like 3 or 4 questions that you run and like none of them were interesting.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, I just spent all this money on this survey and it's like, I don't have a story here. So, and it's mainly because the story that I had in my head wasn't panning out, right? Like all the answers, there was no one answer that was overwhelming the others. So then the answer becomes like, no, it's like if it was the protein bar one, it was like all of them are the same, right? Like everybody likes the. So I guess, what do you do in those cases? Like, have you run into those where it's like this data isn't aligning to our initial kind of hypotheses and like our conversation, so it's not as like surprising or exciting or what have you? What do you have any tips for like how people can rethink this stuff and finding the story when it's not what you originally thought it was going to be?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. Of course, there's maybe areas where I will say it happens surprisingly on rare occurrences with us. I think we have the luxury that we do tend to do more questions per project, particularly if we're committed on a creative level and distribute.
So that's maybe one way to safeguard is more questions.
Yeah. So, 20 for us is the sweet spot and kind of gives more than enough. And when you factor in using a variety of question methods, so, direct yes or no's, multi-choice, lists, statement, agreement, ratings, 5-point scales in terms of how strongly you agree with certain elements. There's sliders, there's finance-based questions. For us, we're usually pretty assured that something interesting will emerge from the data that supports the overall hypothesis. But the key is to kind of agree a broader hypothesis that isn't a live or die one. Our bar must top. That's a common thing we see, but we guide clients like, look, you're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't, if you go down that route, because even if your bar tops it, then often there's like, well, it's not enough. We don't want to say only 50%, because that means we're saying there's 2 sides to every stat. So if you go too direct, then often we get the like, well, it's not, we thought it'd be like 96%. And that means half the world isn't eating our protein bar. We can't go out with that. So what we tend to do is move into the more kind of accessible areas. Things like, we'll see it a lot with like streaming companies, of course, who are like, okay, why don't we do like best movies, best TV show of all time? Okay, great, let's do it. but we don't have Breaking Bad on on script. We only mention our things. In which case, don't do a list. It looks contrived, and as soon as it looks contrived, I mean, journalist's job is literally to sniff out BS. They see you coming a mile away. You know, no one's running that. So I think if you talk about the space where the product is, the movie nights in that instance, or the kind of watching times, or the perfect length of a movie, or debate points within that industry, you know, it can be knowledge on protein. It can be how do we know our levels? Do we know how much we're supposed to eat? Do we struggle on that front? It doesn't have to be people who eat protein bars feel better, you know. You know, if it says protein bar, it has to be a bit smarter than that, and a little bit more accessible to the average newsreader and the editor scrutinizing it.
Yeah.
You could even split, for example. I love a great split, and obviously then you've got age, you've got gender, you've got region, household income. There may be 10 questions, 20 questions, but then you times that again by the 5 splits you've got stories all over. So it's being able to dig into those. And
that's where the sample size comes into it.
Yes, that helps at a regional level, definitely. But even, you know, from an age perspective, so much generational headlines, Gen Z headlines were everywhere, that kind of comparison and where are things going. In the UK, you see a lot more tabloidy, like Gen Z are killing the cup of tea, it's dead, or things like that. But generational, no matter your country, it's interesting to see how things line up. But you can get more creative than that by splitting on things that, you know, perhaps don't jump to mind. It might be splitting by your level of protein intake for your protein bar. And maybe there is a correlation that higher protein intake leads to longer workouts or more satisfying workouts. Or even if you don't want to go into performance led, doing a like how your gym approach is influenced by your playlist. Why don't you correlate your style? Do introverts and extroverts have different types of approach in the gym? You know, like is there ways in? One of the best stories we ever did, and I love it, is a simple split by do you make the bed or don't you make the bed? They're kind of either or ground, right?
Yeah.
And that just blew up because you know, people share it with their partners. People are, you know, that you're usually one or the other. You're often married to a different one. You know, it's that kind of beautiful take on things, and it's not just related to your sleeping habits, but you split that by your success at work, the number of promotions, who's more punctual, all the kind of you know, just that reaction you gave there.
Yeah.
Really, what we're looking for is that's a talker. So that's the sweet spot for us. Does vary a little bit from the direct product, and appreciate you know, that in the SEO world and the digital PR world, there's definitely like, well, great, yes, if we could just talk about anything, my job would be easy. But there, you know, creatively guide as well.
Right. Yeah, it's funny. Like, people might get mad at me for saying this, but I always thought like advertising agencies have it a lot easier than like SEO, PR agencies, because a lot of times it seems like they're just like, oh, let's talk about it. You know, we're going to partner with whatever, and it's going to be you know, but whereas, and especially in the SEO world, like the crossovers, you have to really, it's a lot harder to find that middle ground and that balance, like you talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Rick, I could talk about this for hours. I've already taken up a lot of your time, so let's end it here. But if people have questions about this stuff, where could they best reach you? Is it just LinkedIn?
LinkedIn's probably the best bet. Yeah, please do. I'd be happy to chat.
Yeah.
You can tell.
Yeah. And like always, I will, you know, if people have questions for me or for Rick, comment on the video, comment on, you know, the LinkedIn posts and whatnot. And I'll make sure I funnel them over to Rick, and so he can answer them. But Rick, thank you so much. The last quick thing I just want to ask, I guess, is like, you know, what did I forget? If you were interviewing yourself here, like what is a question that I didn't ask? I feel like that's always an important one.
I mean, your questions were good. Don't get me wrong. I think, I mean, it's not so much what you didn't ask, but in terms of where we see our kind of work going in our partnerships and the kind of people using us and organizations, I think it's like, what's the intention? And we see ourselves increasingly supporting, you know, dedicated thought leadership, brand newsrooms. You know, it used to be that the B word was a bit of a dirty word. You know, dealing with journalists and trying to build partnerships and get our stories out there used to be like, okay, so they're really data led. When do I mention there's a brand on them? Oh, okay.
Right.
And I think that world has changed. I think there's so much great content being produced by really specialist, talented people on the brand side. And now I think we've moved past for a lot the like, oh, we just have to like shoehorn our product into things and say like, buy it. Now there's just amazing newsrooms doing in the brand side, doing great content. And I think it's really about long-term intentions and building the kind of, I have heard more words for coverage over a long period, a drumbeat, a steady stream, a drip feed, usually water-based, consistent, consecutive pieces of coverage to, of course, the AI and GEO element is playing a part. But that way to kind of amplify content is really where we're positioning ourselves much more. And, that's not just digitally, that's through SMTs, and we're seeing such appetite from broadcasters, and that really plays into our kind of talk value things. We're really using data as the foundation for campaigns. You mentioned trend reports. People are looking for new ways to raise the profile of their internal talent. They want their voice. We don't really want to hear direct from a company anymore. We want to hear from thought leaders and people. It's that human connection and intelligence that we've talked about, and we want to meet them where the audiences are across platforms. So that's really, to incorporate data as a foundation across campaigns, podcasting, so many different mediums, sales enablement, all of that. I think it's about thinking about data on a wider level and not just in the kind of maybe direct context.
Right. Yeah. Very, very interesting stuff here, Rick, like kind of thinking on it beyond what you're normally used to and kind of figuring out different ways to leverage the data that you have and the internal data and the, proprietary data that you can collect through platforms like yours. So I love it. Rick, thank you so much. I will follow up in the comments, in the show notes with all the stuff that we talked about today. And I'll share some of those great pieces from Talker Research. And again, it's just talkerresearch.com.
Yes.
And Rick Maughan, you can check him out on LinkedIn, connect with him, ask him all your questions. So thanks again, everyone. Thank you, Rick, and we'll see you soon.